Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire supported by Glenlivet Books. 10 days ago in Hardwar at a Dharm Sansad, blood-curdling calls were made for the genocide of Muslims and ethnic cleansing. Hindus were told to do to Muslims what has happened to the Rohingyas in Myanmar. Never in my life did I think Indian citizens would turn on fellow citizens in this way. And yet that's precisely what's happened. So today I want to ask a simple, blunt question. What does it feel like to be a Muslim in Narendra Modi's India? My guest is one of India's foremost actors. Right through his life, he's had only one identity. He's been Indian. Religion has not mattered. But today, many of his own countrymen are thrusting a religious identity upon him. Joining me now is the well-known and highly regarded actor, Naseeruddin Shah. Naseeruddin Shah, at that Dham Sansad 10 days ago in Hardwar, blood-curdling calls were made for a genocide of Muslims, for ethnic cleansing, and Hindus were told to do to Muslims what has been done to the Rohingya in Myanmar. What did it feel like to hear your own fellow countrymen, your fellow citizens, calling for a massacre of your community?
Well, the first reaction was anger. What is happening here is, I think, a concerted attempt to make Muslims feel insecure. It is starting from the very top, where Aurangzeb is being invoked, and Mughal invaders are being invoked, and the separatism seems to have become a policy for the ruling party. I was curious to see what would happen to these guys, and the fact that nothing happened to them is not surprising, because nothing happened to a person whose son trampled over the farmers. He's not been sacked, he's not been chastised, he's not been taken to task, he has not been asked to leave the ministry. Anyway, that's something which is sub judice, so I won't go into that in too much detail. But the fact is that there is definitely an attempt to make us scared, and that is something which I have always held as a placard, that we should not be scared. And funnily, being scared is one of the accusations that is thrust upon me all the time. You are scared of being in India, because I said something months and months ago, almost a year ago, about being concerned about the fate of my children. My life is over and I have another 10 years to go, so I won't live to see it. But what I am concerned about is what would become of my children. And I had also stated that it is tragic that a cow's death should have more importance than the death of a police inspector. This, for some reason, made me an object of ridicule and an object of hate and a target of abusive threats all the time, which completely baffled me, because I don't think I had said anything provocative of that kind. At the same time, funnily, a film of mine which I had done some 10 years ago, called Wednesday, was pulled out. A film I'd done more than 25 years ago called Sarfarosh was pulled out. In Sarfarosh, I play a Pakistani ghazal singer who turns out to be an intelligence agent. In Wednesday, I play a lone wolf who decides to assassinate 4 terrorists who he fears will otherwise get away. These were shown side by side, along with a video that was recorded of me when I visited Lahore, and I was asked how I feel coming to Lahore. And I said, I feel completely at home. This seemed to rile and rankle everybody, and they said, if you're at home, go there. And I don't understand why this should happen, because if you go to somebody's house and you're very comfortable and you're treated well, wouldn't you say this is just like home?
Absolutely.
And that was contrasted with the speech I make in Wednesday, where I talk of wiping the house clean of cockroaches and so on. And it was shown as what a traitor this guy is. On the one hand, his film image says this, and what he says in real life is this. What I was saying in real life was that I feel welcomed over here. I feel very comfortable over here. And this was at the same time as our Prime Minister and the Pakistani Prime Minister were holding hands like schoolgirls and walking down the causeway of the Lahore airport.
Absolutely. Nasir, I'm going to deliberately quote from two people at the Dharam Sansad because I think the audience needs to realize just how shocking, just how blood curdling, just how horrifying some of the things spoken were. Swami Prabodhanand said, like in Myanmar, the police here, the politicians here, the army, and every Hindu must pick up arms, and we will have to conduct this cleanliness drive. There is no solution apart from this. And then Pooja Shakun Pandey said, if 100 of us are too ready to kill 2 million of them, then we will win and make India a Hindu nation. Did you ever in your life believe that Muslims would be spoken in this way by their own Hindu brothers and sisters? These are fellow citizens turning on you.
Yeah, it's absolutely, it leaves you aghast when you hear things like this. And I wonder if these people know what they're talking about. Because what they're calling for is a full-scale civil war. 200 million of us are not going to get wiped out that easily. 200 million of us are going to fight back. 200 million of us claim this to be our motherland. 200 million of us belong here. We were born here. Generations of our families have lived here and died here. And I'm certain that if any such movement begins, it's going to be met with a massive resistance and a massive amount of anger. And these people who make these statements, to whom nothing is done, whereas a poet, a comedian is arrested for a joke he was going to make. Whereas things like what this abominable Yati Narsingh Anand chap goes around saying are absolutely abominable, and they are on the verge of ridiculous. They would be funny if they weren't so ominous.
But you said something very important. These people don't realize that they are creating the potential conditions for a civil war. 200 million Muslims are not going to buckle down and die just because a Dharam Sansad is threatening to attack and kill them. They are threatening the very integrity of our country.
Yes. And they're threatening, as you said, their fellow citizens. They're threatening people who belong here as much as they do. And it's amazing that the atrocities of the so-called atrocities of the Mughals are being highlighted all the time. They forget that the Mughals were people who contributed to this country. The Mughals are people who've left lasting monuments, who've left lasting history, who've left culture, who've left the tradition of dance and music and painting and poetry and literature. No one talks about Taimur. No one talks about Mahmud of Ghazni. No one talks about Nadir Shah, because I don't suppose these people are conversant with that history. Those were the marauders who came, looted and left. The Mughals came here to make this their homeland. They were like, you could call them refugees, if you like. They were pretty well-off refugees. But the Mughals are being blamed unnecessarily, and to hold every Muslim in India today responsible for the so-called atrocities, I think is nothing short of ridiculous.
But you know, Naseeruddin Shah, it's not just what was said at the Dharam Sansad that sent shivers down people's spine. It's also the response. Days went by without the police taking any action, and even till today, there have been no arrests. When an FIR was finally filed, it was for the very minimal crime of provoking religious enmity. The Director General of Police in Uttarakhand has confirmed to the Hindu that the far more important Unlawful Activities Prevention Act has not been applied, and it may not be applied. And yet, last year, when the Tablighi Jamaat was accused of spreading COVID-19, some of them were charged with homicide. When Kashmiri students applaud a Pakistani cricket victory, they are charged with sedition. Do Muslims believe that the police will be fair and objective? Do Muslims believe that the police will bring these dreadful culprits to justice?
It depends on who is giving the orders to the police, I think. And this this kind of discrimination of justice starts at the very top. I think it percolates down all the way. And the example is being set by those at the top. So the policemen act on orders. It's a moot point as to whether the policemen themselves feel a sense of joy or something at beating up people. But obviously they do from the footage that we've seen during the lockdown. But what is one to do if the police, if the representation of Muslims in the police in any case is very small, and even if it were a little larger, and if there were a Muslim policeman who were ordered to charge with a lathi at a crowd, he would jolly well obey. I don't think he has any choice in the matter.
But you said a very important thing. How the police behave, how they respond, whether they're objective and fair and bring the culprits to justice depends upon the orders from the top. So let's look at the political response. There hasn't been a word of condemnation from the Uttarakhand government. There hasn't been a word of condemnation from the central government, and the Prime Minister's silence is deafening. It's almost as if to suggest that nothing happened or he doesn't care what happened.
I think he doesn't care. He genuinely doesn't care. He is, well, at least you can't accuse him of being a hypocrite in that sense, that he expresses remorse for something which he doesn't feel any remorse about. He's never said a word of apology for the Ahmedabad program. He's never said a word of apology for anything else. He did half-heartedly apologize for the Kisan thing, but it was an insincere apology, and not a word of chastisement to any of these people. In fact, he follows these people on Twitter, and obviously why he does that is known only to him, but he obviously derives some sort of pleasure out of that.
You know, the silence from the Prime Minister is not just morally problematic because he is the leader of this country, but it also, do you think, is a clear sign to those who've been making calls for genocide that they have his silent support, that he's in a way encouraging them, because as you say, he's not chastising them, he's not condemning them. Does that worry you, that there is this silent support from the very top for these people who want to massacre your community?
It's not entirely surprising. It is worrisome, but then that is more or less what we expected. I did fear that it would come to this, though I must say that how things have turned out are worse than anyone's worst expectations. It's a problem. We have a leader who keeps silent in the face of such provocation, a person who claims to care for everybody, a person who claims to work for everybody's development, a person who says he has no problems against any religion, and yet he will parade his own religious beliefs to the accompaniment of zillions of cameras, of course, and at the same time find the time to run down, to issue a dog whistle about the Muslims. It's certainly worrying, but I really don't know what there is that one can do about that.
But the sad part is that what happened in Haridwar is only the latest outrage against Muslims. For the last 7 years, since 2014, when Narendra Modi first became Prime Minister, Muslims have been repeatedly accused of love jihad. They've been subjected to cow lynching. They've been attacked by vigilantes and mobs. And repeatedly and frequently, senior BJP leaders like Yogi Adityanath publicly taunt them. Have Muslims been reduced to second-class citizens in their own country?
They are in the process of being reduced to second-class citizens, and it's happening in every aspect. It's happening in every field. It's also true that they say films reflect society or society reflect films. I don't know, but certainly what's happening in the film world is reflecting what is happening in the country. And this is an attempt to spread a phobia among the Muslims, and the Muslims must not give in to it. That is what I have always maintained, that we must not admit that this thing is frightening us, because if it comes to the crunch, we will fight back. That is a fact. When you have senior leaders openly saying Hindus and Muslims cannot live together, उनकी दो संस्कृतियां अलग अलग हैं, is he not contradicting the constitution? Is he not going against the tenets of the constitution? And yet he thinks nothing of it, and he goes on repeating the same thing. Shamshan or Qabristan, a mosque and mandir, all this kind of stuff is being constantly talked about. It's the BJP has hit upon the most effective way of dividing and ruling and retaining power by assembling the Hindu majority. What they feel is going to be their core majority, and they don't give a damn. The Muslims are being marginalized. They are being redundant. They are, and gradually the process is on to prove them redundant.
You said something very important, though. You said it sotto voce. And because you said it sotto voce, it becomes more powerful. You said, if it comes to the crunch, we will fight back. That's the last resort that he's leaving you, isn't he? That you'll have to physically fight back to defend yourself and to protect your status.
Yes, and if it comes to that, we will. Because we are defending our homes, we are defending our homeland, we are defending our families, we are defending our children. I'm not talking of our beliefs. Beliefs very easily get threatened. I mean, every now and then you hear Islam khatre mein hai. Now, of course, you're hearing Hinduism is under threat. I mean, how absurd can you be to believe a thing like that, or to even say a thing like that? When you outnumber us 10-1, and Muslims will outnumber the Hindus someday. I mean, what rate will we have to procreate to outnumber the Hindus someday? And why should we want to? Why should we want to? We are happy where we are. We've done our bit for the country, and we feel that we deserve to live in peace.
I want to go one step further. Today, mobs will not let Muslims pray in Gurgaon. Mobs will not let Muslims sell vegetables and bangles in the villages and small towns of UP. Mobs will not let Muslims set up non-vegetarian food stalls in the cities of Gujarat. And in fact, in Gujarat, the Disturbed Areas Act will not let Muslims buy property in areas that are deemed to be Hindu. Do you find that the country you live in is becoming sharply polarized, and the divide between Hindus and Muslims is growing, often virtually every day?
It is being encouraged to grow. It is being fed. If a natural hatred between two religions which preach different things, if that kind of hatred is natural, then shouldn't there be much more of a hatred and animosity between the Sikhs and the Muslims? At the partition, it was the Sikhs and the Muslims who were at each other's throats, who suffered at each other's hands, who saw the bloodletting being done by either side. And yet, today it is the Sikhs who open their gurudwaras to a Muslim group who wants to do their namaz. And a bunch of Hindu fundamentalists comes and disrupts the namaz. I think it's only the Sikhs who are noble enough to perform a gesture like this. I really wonder if the Muslims would reciprocate this kind of a gesture.
Naseer, I know you're not typical of Indian Muslims, but there's a question that I want to put to you, because I imagine it's a question that's been playing in your mind for a couple of years now. What does it feel like to be a Muslim in Narendra Modi's India?
I feel very angry and I feel very resentful. And I feel pity for those who worshipped our beloved leader without question, and who will not tolerate even a joke about him. I do not feel insecure, because I know this is my home and nobody can drive me from it. I've done my place, I've done my work to deserve my place. But what makes me angry is the undisguised, visceral hatred that seems to rule most members of the ruling party. It's what bothers me, and I know for a fact it'll be harmful for them in the future.
Let me put it like this. You were born in Barabanki, educated in Ajmer and Nainital. You're one of India's most highly regarded actors. Your brother rose to be Deputy Chief of the Army. How do the two of you feel when you are repeatedly told, go to Pakistan?
We laugh it off. I tell those who tell me to go to Pakistan to go to Kailasa. Why go to Pakistan? I mean, it's absurd. The Urdu is a Pakistani language, if you please. The word what is the word in Diwali ad?
Mazhab? Tehzeeb?
No, there was some. No, not Tehzeeb. Rivaj, which was Roshni ka Rivaj or something. People objected to a thing like that. Now, how absurd can you get? How many words of Farsi are there in the Hindi language, in the Urdu language, in the Marathi language, in the Gujarati language? How many words of Arabic are there in Urdu? Now, Urdu is mistakenly considered the language of the Muslims, as Javed Akhtar has repeatedly said, and it is not a language of the Muslims. It's a language of the Punjab, it's a language of Madhya Pradesh, of Uttar Pradesh. Unfortunately, Pakistan claimed it as theirs, which branded it as a Muslim language.
But the main thing is, as a Muslim living in Narendra Modi's India, you feel angry and resentful. And
that's right.
And that's not a happy way for anyone to feel.
No, it's not. When I see our Prime Minister making ludicrous scientific statements, when I see him, covering up the truth a lot of the time, when I see him dissembling facts, when I see him blaming what he's doing on his opponents, when I really feel that the kind of the coarse language that is used, it's as if the political discourse has never been so low in my living memory.
Let's at this point broaden our discussion, because it's not just about what's happening to Muslims that I want to talk to you. I also want to talk to you about what's happening to India as a whole. Your wife is Hindu. Your children were brought up in a modern, secular, forward-looking outlook. How do you view the sort of country India is becoming?
It's hard to say. It'll be interesting to watch. But I know for sure that it's important that we do not parade our religious identities. Oh, for the day when religion will cease to matter. But of course, that's a utopian wish. But when we were to get married, we consulted a family elder who said, I don't think there'll be any political problem, but there will be social problems. Whether the house will have a Hindu ethos or a Muslim ethos, whether alcohol will be permitted, whether meat will be eaten, etc., etc., etc. Whether Holi will be celebrated, whether we have. But he said there will be no political problem. I remember him saying he was dead wrong. We have had absolutely no social problem. We have several friends who are married interreligiously. In fact, my children were surprised the first time they met a couple who were of the same religion, because so many of our friends are Hindu Muslim or Muslim Christian or Hindu Christian or Jew and Sikh or something like that. So that was the kind of country that one hoped to bring them up in, and that was the kind of country we told them this was. This was the kind of country I was told this was, where my father refused to go away to Pakistan. His brothers left. My mother's brothers left, several of my family left. My father refused to go. He felt we have as much of a future here as we would have had over there. Had I been a child in today's India, I don't know what future would await me.
Today's India might well have pushed you out. In fact, it might well have made you want to leave.
It might well have done that, but that is one thing I'm determined not to do. Run and hide is not my way, and I'm not going to do that. I don't care how many threats come my way. I don't care how much menace there is in the air. I will stick around and weather it, and I'll teach my children to do the same.
You know, Naseer, you and I grew up in the 60s and 70s at a time when everyone got together to celebrate Eid, to celebrate Christmas. 3 days ago, the world celebrated Christmas, but in Assam, the Bajrang Dal protested violently because Hindus were participating in Christian celebration. In Gurgaon and in Patodi, school pantomimes were disrupted because the gate crashers, there's no other word I can think for them, didn't like it. Churches were vandalized in Ambala, celebrations were stopped in Karnataka. Are Hindus becoming intolerant? And if the answer is no, then where does this intolerance come from?
As I said, it's an engineered hatred. It's an absolutely engineered hatred. The intolerance for each other's faiths, and faith, I think, is such a dangerous thing that it can cause you, it can drive you to extremes of violence. The churches being vandalized, mosques being vandalized. You can just imagine what would happen if someone attempted to do a similar thing to a temple. I don't think justice would delay in dealing with such a person. But nothing happens to these people who vandalize other places of worship. It's ridiculous. My God is bigger than your God, kind of thing, and you have no right to worship what you believe in. It's reaching the point of the absurd.
You know, yesterday we discovered that Mother Teresa's missionaries of charity are not permitted to receive funds from abroad. And it transpires that this was announced on Christmas Day. Do you think that was just coincidental? Or do you think the date and the timing is deliberate and cunning? Another way of sending a crude message across to Christians.
It's certainly deliberate. It cannot not be deliberate. Greenpeace funding has been stopped. Amnesty India's funding has been stopped. And so many others working for the benefit of society, they are being obstructed in every way. I simply am at a loss to understand why. Everything that is progressive seems to be anti-government according to the powers that be. The fact that a peaceful church service can be disrupted by violent mobs who sit down and start singing bhajans in there, which is, it's quite unthinkable. This kind of thing never happened before. And it obviously has its approval from the top.
Or it would be stopped. It would be condemned. They would be punished. None of that is happening.
None of that is happening. And none of it is likely to happen. And it's likely to get worse.
But it's not just in terms of religion that our country is changing into something we could never ever imagine it would become. Just look what happens to people who are critics and dissent. They're charged with sedition. Look at Parliament. It's not just non-functional, it's become irrelevant. Look at the media. Large sections prefer to be lapdogs rather than growl and be guard dogs. And even the judiciary deliberately and consciously postpones cases that they know could embarrass the government. Is India's commitment to democracy the one thing that made us so proud when we were young? Our commitment to the constitutional values we gave ourselves, is all of that floundering?
In some sections, it definitely is. It would be hasty to judge the judiciary because I suppose they work under tremendous pressures. But the Supreme Court has been asserting itself of late, which is a very hopeful sign. There is, despite the doom and gloom, I would say there are hopeful signs. And it would be premature to say that we are drifting away from democracy, though at times it does seem like we are living in George Orwell's 1984. It does seem like that, where the supreme leader, where you open the newspaper and you're greeted by the mirthless grin of the Big Brother, where 2 minutes of hate is celebrated every day, which is what is happening on Facebook and all these stupid social media things. 2 minutes of hate. It's not now 2 minutes of hate, it's 24 hours of hate, where I Love Big Brother is the anthem, where every citizen ultimately is compelled to say, I love Big Brother. It at times does feel like that, though it is too premature to, I don't know, because democracy is recent phenomenon in India. India has always, before 70 years ago, was a dominion. Before that, it was a bunch of royal Maharajas who kept fighting with each other after the Mughal period. So I think democracy is still finding its feet in this country, and this is perhaps one of the missteps that any person learning to walk will take.
Absolutely. In his constitutional speech in the Constituent Assembly, Ambedkar called democracy a topsoil on a very different surface that may reject it. But before I end, you mentioned Big Brother. Let me talk about that for a moment. There is an aura and a cult of personality that's emerging. His own party has deified the Prime Minister. An army of trolls descend on you if you criticize him. And I notice that he only refers to himself in the third person.
In the third person, yeah, that's fantastic. It's I mean, to have such a giant assessment of your own worth and to be so susceptible to flattery, to be so ill-informed on many things, to at one stage openly boast that he has had no education. He did this before he became Prime Minister. It's there on video. Maine koi padhai nahi ki, says he, which at that time was considered a very charming admission, but then it acquires ominous reverberations now, considering the things he said and done. His desire to be center stage everywhere. It's very close to another word I can think of beginning with M, which I won't say, but it's definitely he is being elevated not just to kingly but to godlike status, and that cannot be a good thing for any of us.
We're coming to the end of this interview, but let me end with just one question. As you reflect on the sort of country India is becoming, how would you describe your feelings? Are you saddened? Are you disillusioned and disheartened? Or do you go further and feel a sense of despair?
I have to dismiss the sense of despair, because then that leads to nothing. I'm saddened and I'm angered. I'm not so much of an optimist as to believe that things will set themselves right, but I'm what they call an agathist, that things will finally, things are not okay, but they will finally set themselves right. Because time moves in circles. No despot has lasted forever, and they have all come to grief. And sooner or later, that cycle will come full circle in India as well. I may not be around to see it, and we may have to go through these living with leaders who believe in superstitions like banging thalis and all that sort of thing for another few years. But I'm certain that the wheel will come full circle.
That is perhaps consolation. As they say colloquially, this too will pass. The only problem is we don't know when. And we don't know how long it'll last. Naseeruddin Shah, thank you very much for this interview. Take care, stay safe, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Karan. All the best.